All right. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy McFadgen. I am a managing director here at TopStep, and I will be presenting the webinar today. In this webinar, we will be reviewing some of the features from the latest OpenAir release and highlighting how they can help you in your OpenAir system. Here are some of the topics and features that I'll cover from the latest release. As with every release, I encourage everyone to review the full release notes document for a comprehensive list, as there may be items which could benefit you that are not otherwise covered today. And we will cover the following items in today's presentation. I'll discuss these particular features, as well as provide use cases and examples of impact within your organization. First up, and ultimately the most impactful on all OpenAir users, is the new user interface. The enhancements in this release are a build on phase 3 of the redesigned user experience. As part of this release, if you previously only had phases 1 or 2 enabled, you will notice that your OpenAir environment has been automatically updated to include all phases. The biggest or most notable change from what was previously phase 2 to phase 3 is the layout of the administration global settings page. Additional items to call out with the redesigned OpenAir user experience include, again, the elimination of the phased rollout. Previously, phases 1, 2, and 3 is how the UI had been partitioned. These are now part of a single switch to enable that user interface. With the enforced column filter value search, which was an optional feature previously, portions of the earlier functionality within that feature have been removed and replaced with a much simpler approach. This is also no longer an optional feature and is included as standard part of the redesigned user experience. More redesigned list views and headers for consistent look across features and pages. And finally, what we've all been waiting for, a date when all OpenAir accounts will be upgraded to the new UI. So to answer the question, will this impact me? The answer is yes. If you do nothing about it, your OpenAir instance will be automatically updated to the new UI this time next year. If you have not already enabled the new UI, in order to avoid last-minute confusion and questions from staff, you can get ahead of it by preparing training materials and familiarizing staff with the changes by requesting that the new UI be enabled. There are several benefits to the new UI, in particular usability enhancements. And again, the switch is now a single switch and has included some of the previously optional features as standard functionality. There are several resources available to support your team in the change and moving to the new redesigned OpenAir user experience. The biggest change is the navigation panel moving from the header to the left side of the page. Testing and becoming familiar with the layout and location of fields will be crucial. OpenAir has published a new UI guide available in Suite Answers, as well as TopStep's UI4 ebook, which is available on your website. So be sure to mark your calendars for April 2022. A new feature that was introduced in 2019 and has been growing ever since is the Project Center. The latest updates to the Project Center offer some welcome features. Adding additional booking-related information columns is helpful for project managers who also perform bookings and act as resource managers for their projects. The inline editing enhancements for deleting and adding multiple bookings is also a nice new feature that will help project managers avoid context switching between the project and resource module. And finally, the ability to create multiple bookings over a continuous period of time equates to creating a booking from the main navigation menu. Again, this creates greater efficiencies through the use of the Project Center. While you do currently have to create a new booking row before adding multiple bookings to it, OpenAir does have plans to improve and simplify this feature throughout future releases. The Project Center outline view is a feature enabled by role permission. Once the outline view itself is enabled, the ability to view and use the Project Center booking worksheet, that is an internal switch that must be enabled by OpenAir support. This feature allows the project managers, again, to remain more so in the project itself, even when booking out resources for their project. Depending on your process, this may create greater efficiencies and a more streamlined experience within OpenAir. The Project Center booking worksheet is a great new feature that is worth checking out. Again, because this includes process considerations, it is advised to enable this in a sandbox environment first and engage a subset of project managers to run through this feature and functionality with a couple of their projects. Again, the Project Center itself is enabled via role permission, and that's the View Project Center role permission. The Project Center booking worksheet, the add-on to that Project Center, is an internal switch within that feature. We will be publishing at a future date here this year is an ebook about the Project Center, giving a nice succinct summary of how that can be used. Expense attachments. Expense attachments now support drag and drop functionality. Included with this functionality is also the ability to upload multiple attachments at once. While this feature is relatively small in the scheme of things, it's a quick win and a great time saver for staff. The expense attachments feature within this release is an internal switch that must be enabled via OpenAir support through your OpenAir administrator. And from the testing that we did, we found no reason that this should not be enabled for all organizations. Of course, if there's any question, go ahead and enable that in a non-production or a sandbox environment to do some quick testing, but it works great and we all really like it. And if you haven't already enabled this feature, it's worth enabling again and showing users how they can save time in uploading expense attachments. Allow employees to modify projects. It's a mouthful of a feature and switch name there. This feature, as described, allows for segmentation across project items updates based on the user role. While there were previously no restrictions on who could edit a project properties form, even though they may have only needed to update a project issue, for example, this option allows for that split to determine who cannot update a project itself while updating items, again, such as an issue within the project. Examples included in this feature are budget items using the transactional budget feature, project issues, and hopefully soon billing and recognition rules. This feature is helpful when multiple people or teams are working on a single project. Great use case examples would be if a project manager should be the only one updating the project properties form, but other team members are expected to enter or update issues or, again, transactional budget lines without having the ability to update or change the project demographics. And although some of the project-based item role privileges indicate that a user can only view and modify certain items, they actually can, in fact, also create them. Issues and budgets are included in this category. So just be aware of that when assigning the roles. That view and modify also includes create in that for those particular items. And we want to note that while the release notes themselves indicate that billing and recognition rules are included in this feature, for example, if finance should only be able to add billing or recognition rules, but not update the information on the project properties form, neither of these options work with the switch enabled at this time. OpenAir support is aware of this issue as it was reported by our team during testing. Password expiration and notifications. Effective April 10th of this year, on production OpenAir accounts, users will receive advanced notices of the date their passwords will expire. By now, if you're using a sandbox account, you will have seen those expirations in action as users were forced to update passwords. Password expiration notification emails will be sent both 14 days before the password expires and again 3 days before the password expires, unless the user has changed the password in the meantime. Notices include the date the password will expire, information about the account for which the password is expiring, such as the company ID and user ID, and instructions for changing the OpenAir password. The notifications are only sent to active users logging into a production OpenAir account using their OpenAir password. Notices are not sent to users accessing OpenAir using SAML single sign-on or NetSuite single sign-on or accessing a demo or sandbox account. So there's absolutely no impact if you're using SAML single sign-on or NetSuite single sign-on. Is there an impact? Absolutely. Every user in OpenAir is going to be impacted by this as OpenAir is enhancing security measures. There's no action to take on this, rather more to be aware of this, especially if you're an administrator or in charge of resetting user passwords or answering login questions in the event that users have questions about password changes or timing of that. For a dedicated integration account and to avoid frequent integration disruptions due to password changes, for example, if you are using a third-party integration tool which requires a dedicated integration account, a switch can be enabled and set at the user level for that particular users where this would come into play, which does not require password changes. If you're not sure if you have a dedicated integration user for any existing integrations, follow up with your OpenAir administrator or IT team to confirm. More information about the password security questions can also be found both in Suite Answers and in the OpenAir Security Guide. Again, this feature lets the security questions feature lets each user reset their password by answering some security questions and minimizes the amount of time required for an administrator to support individual password resets. NetSuite connector enhancements. Changes to this NetSuite connector, otherwise known as the NetSuite OpenAir integration, include both a custom workflow export and a self-service option. With the custom workflow export, while this appears to have limited use case at this point, this is what we hope is the first of many enhancements to send OpenAir data to NetSuite. Again, in addition to the custom workflow export, changes have been made to allow OpenAir administrators access to the NetSuite OpenAir integration settings. These changes support more self-service and reduce the amount of support required from OpenAir themselves to enable certain integration features. The integration self-service option, for example, if you have two sets of OpenAir administrators, say a system administrator versus IT or an integration administrator, and you want to limit access to who can touch the NetSuite OpenAir integration, you will want to enable this feature. Not all admins will then have that access with the feature enabled. Examples of that self-service include the ability to enable certain standard workflows and general integration administration settings without having to request through support. With the custom workflow export, with this change, an example or use case is that you now have the ability to create users in OpenAir and use OpenAir as the source system for user setup and send to NetSuite. That is a very common question that comes up to us. Do we have to have the employees originate in NetSuite and send to OpenAir? And historically, folks have done that, but now with this custom workflow export, you do have the ability to swap that source system and send data from OpenAir to NetSuite with that. With the workflow export, in order to have that on, there are several switches that work in conjunction. for that feature. And you have to have both the 2020.1 communication endpoint enabled. This is all outlined in the release notes as well. That's in the administration settings in OpenAir. In the NetSuite integration, NetSuite OpenAir integration, for example, in NetSuite, under the Manage Integrations option underneath the Setup tab, make sure that you have the integration called Internal NS Application OpenAir, and your TBA needs to point to that. What that means is that you will need to create a new key in NetSuite and update the Credentials tab in OpenAir. If you are enabling or plan to enable either of these features, ensure that your administrator or integration expert is comfortable with the changes being made. As always, testing in sandbox environment is strongly recommended so that you know what to anticipate when making the changes in production. A few additional items worth noting in today's session are these particular features. OpenAir Integration Manager OAIM version 6.5. To upgrade OAIM or Integration Manager, for those of you who use this for imports or exports, simply click on the original download URL and follow the prompts to install OAIM. The latest version will automatically be applied through this process. Service column on time entries. When reviewing time entries, we find it helpful to have the service column available. Having this information as an option for a column when troubleshooting or viewing details on time entries is often very helpful. The same goes for the notes column on the receipt in the list views. This is a nice time saver and certainly a convenient field to have available. And finally, a request that many organizations have made over the years is the ability to use job codes, both in cross-tabbed reports and in filtering, and now you can. With the support for job code filtering, you can roll up values by this field in cross-tab reports, as well as use job code as a filter within reports themselves. What to remember when enabling any of these new features? Go in informed and prepared to create the most efficient rollout for you or your team. The points of preparing, testing, and communication are absolutely foundation to any changes that you're making within your OpenAir instance. And this concludes our spring release review webinar. So thank you all very much for attending today. I appreciate your time.